Go back about 15 years ago, my oldest, Sarah, lives in Miami. She pulled me over at one point and said, "Hey Dad, I know you have a lot of fun stories about your birding adventures, but we kids don't always want to hear your stories like you want to tell them." Like, stop to the stomach. However, I have an idea for you. I'm going to help you create a blog. And with her help, I've dutifully written blog posts every couple of months when I thought I've had a decent story or chased a rare bird. Always have to have a picture of the bird as well. I try to hold myself to that with humorous anecdotes. So during COVID, I had a fair amount of free time, and then I reached this milestone of 800. And I thought, okay, well, I can weave together my favorite stories, at least in pictures, add a little sort of connective tissue so it flows decently, and voila, created Bird Tales, a lifetime pursuit. So that's me, not current, but that is me. Always with binoculars, unless I'm in a coat and tie strapped to my job in Philadelphia, or chasing some ball on a racquet court. But a lot of people ask me, so why birds? Like, what's the deal with the birds? And I think about that every day. Why am I sort of consumed by the birds? Yeah, sure, they're good looking, particularly the males, lots of colors, their songs, that's neat. But I think for me, what really attracts me is the fact that they're able to fly. So they're free and they're independent and they can go anywhere at any time. And when our lives crisscross or intersect with a wild bird, I find that sort of magical. So how did I get into this in the first place? I call these folks the influencers. First, I'm going to try the red dot. There we go, my parents. Mom and Dad were very adventurous and traveled the world. Dad was a busy physician and generally only had Sundays off, and his passion was orchids. So in order for me to spend time with my dad, I would join him on Sundays where he would travel to local areas in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Again, I was raised outside of Philadelphia. Day trips with Dad while he tromped around looking at and photographing orchids. And he actually wrote a 900-page book. Not exactly a bestseller, but very academic on the dendrobium orchid. You can Google it. But Dad had a passing interest in birds as well, so ages 5, 6, 7, maybe 8, I knew the difference between a sparrow and a sandpiper. You know, I knew a little bit about birds. But it was my friend Jeff Dingle in 5th grade, age 10. He invited me to Florida to visit his grandparents for spring vacation. Now his grandfather, Dr. Severinghouse, had just retired as the head of school where I attended and actually where I work now for the past 20 years. And Dr. Severinghouse also shared a hedge with us on the road I grew up on. So at age 10, I knew Dr. Severinghouse, I knew his wife, they knew me, and he had just retired to Coconut Grove, which is basically Miami area, in the late 1960s. So I was not afraid to just join Jeffrey and visit his grandparents. No parents involved for chaperones, it was just 2 10-year-olds and the grandparents. And I thought, well, yeah, I've never been to Florida. I figured we'll watch a lot of exhibition baseball games and come home with a suntan. That'll be pretty good. Well, that's not what happened. For the first day and then the next 7 days, Dr. Severinghouse would get Jeffrey and I up at 5 in the morning, throw us on the back of a country squire, and take us on day trips to Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, the Florida Keys, because he was a serious birder. And we didn't have a choice. And, you know, and it was sort of fun. I liked palm trees and armadillos and alligators, and I remember my first bald eagle. And, you know, that was all okay. But it was the second time, 6th grade, the next year's spring vacation. I suppose I was a good house guest. They invited me back. And I accepted. And that's when it it just hit me, because Dr. Seringhouse, he was an educator. He was a smart guy, and he knew how to entertain and sort of fuel the competitiveness of two 11-year-old boys at this point, and challenge us to be the first to identify the bird, or the first to get this bird. He's the one that gave us the checklists and challenged us to see as many birds as we could in a day. We once reached 100, and he was very proud of us, and we'd like to please him. So that was 6th grade. I'm 11 years old. And in his yard, he had, this is my photo, and generally these are my own photos, taken more recently, but the painted bunting is what we birders, we all have sort of a spark bird. What's that one bird you saw early on in your time that kind of captured your interest? And for me, it was the male painted bunting, which he had in his yard. So, at the end of the 6th grade spring vacation trip, for some reason I made a pledge to myself that I want to see 600 species of birds in the United States by the time I was going to be the impossibly old age of 50. A lot of you in this room, 50 sounds pretty good. And I can't tell you why I chose 50. I guess it seems so distant. But I will tell you why I chose the number 600. Because at that time, the big bird book was Roger Torrey Peterson's Field Guide, which some of you may be familiar with. And there were 645 species of birds that had been seen and identified in the United States and Canada at that point. And I thought, well, I don't want to be greedy and expect to see all 645 by the time I'm 50, but I want to be a Hall of Famer. I want to be Mel Ott. And if any of you are baseball fans, Mel Ott retired in 1959. I never watched him play. But I figured the 645 optimal number, maximum number, was kind of like Babe Ruth, who at the time had the career home run record of 714. If I could be Mel Ott, who hit 511, but he was a Hall of Famer, that would be pretty good. That would satisfy me. So I set that goal, and I never lost track of that. And I always kept birding as a hobby, as an interest. Interestingly, the year after I made that pledge to myself, or that challenge, the American Birding Association was created. Just a coincidence, 1970. And the ABA area at the time was the lower 48 states, Canada plus Alaska. So 49 states in Canada, not Hawaii. Remember that, not Hawaii. So birders then, and even now, across the world, all birders want to have the greatest world list, but generally people don't have the time or the money to travel the world. But the Europeans, the South Americans, Canadians, US, they really look at the ABA area list of birds as sort of your brag card. That's sort of how you identify yourself with other birders. And it's just interesting that I made my challenge to myself a year before this organization was even created. They still are the leading organization that we birders look to for their magazine, and they have great community projects and programs, particularly young birders, as young as 5 years old. They have lots of ways to engage the kids. And the ABA is the one that rules on whether a bird is one species or two species. Or is it a wild bird that you can count for your list? Or no, it's an escaped pet, doesn't count for your life list. The ABA is still sort of the guiding light organization for us birders. So for me, life moves on past 6th grade, high school, college. I considered being a population biologist in college. I didn't want to take organic chemistry at 8 in the morning. So bypassed that. I took the safe route, went to New York, jobs, marriage, kids. Oh yeah, I had to put this in. Lake Nineveh birds. That's hopefully going to keep your attention. We've got up top, these are all taken by me in this area. But evening grosbeak, bald eagle. We do have 2 loon chicks right now on Lake Nineveh, which is fantastic. And the barred owl, which is sort of the most common owl up here. But all these are great birds. I like all birds, but yes, I'm sort of addicted to tracking as many as I can see in the country. But the kid piece. I introduced my children to the joys of nature and hiking. Probably too early. Hike is a 4-letter word. Still, and one of those children, my daughter is here, and I'm going to point her out in a second. But the significant part here, again, I should detect that. I don't think you see any smiles here. I thought this was a great way to introduce the kids to nature. Falconing. I won't go into the details, but it's kind of gory.
They look a little terrified.
They weren't too prepared. This was the holiday card for the year. But this one, the youngest, I won't ask her to stand, but she's in the back. Raise your hand. Still the youngest. Good. This is like the audience. So the significant part here is she's an early teen, 13, maybe 14, and we're playing basketball. And I'm giving the usual positive parenting remarks. You try your best, pursue your goals. And she stops the dribble and looks me in the eye and she says, Dad, whatever happened to that goal of yours of seeing a bunch of birds? And I said, oh yeah, Carly, right. Yeah, I wanted to see 600 birds by the time I was 50 years old. But I'm now 52 and I've missed my opportunity. And she looked at me and she goes, Dad, we lived in England for 6 years. Subtract 6. You're only 46. I think you should pursue your goal.
Great.
Not making that up. And I thought, oh my God, it just hit me in the head. She's right. Like, I have no excuse. I have the time. I've been recently divorced, so I probably had more time than I wanted. And I thought, okay, I'm somewhere in the 570s at this point, age 52, 46 in her mind. And I thought, okay, one of the birds I've always wanted to see is the great gray owl, which is bigger than the great horned owl. It's the biggest owl in North America. It tends to be an Arctic Canadian bird, and every once in a while will dip down, even in Vermont. But the most reliable place to see one in the winter is in the Sax Zim Bog, north of Duluth, Minnesota, in February. And they have
a rock country. I live there.
You know that, I mean, it's cool. I mean, I love Vermont winters. I love Vermont winters. I had never experienced anything like this. It's probably minus 25 Fahrenheit without the wind. And they have a festival for birders to see the rare, unusual Arctic species. And it is the most reliable place for the great gray owl. So I made it to the festival, and the first morning, a bunch of us out in the van with a leader, and you could see a couple of these owls in the distance flying, but not satisfactory looks, and certainly not good enough for a photograph. And they, we looked for a few other things. They threw us back in the van, sent us back to the conference center, which was barely a Quonset hut in a very isolated place, where they had a speaker, a guy like me, Paul Bannock, had just written a book, Owls and Woodpeckers, actually a really good book. But I had the brilliant idea. I thought, heck, if everybody's in this lodge listening to him, why don't I just ditch the conference? Much better chance of getting the owl on my own. And again, I want the photograph. So I did. And boom. That's what I want to hear. Within 5 minutes, I mean, that's hardly even a telephoto lens. It's about 3 p.m. February, Minnesota. The sun is setting almost. And right, so I make my little clicker work. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the sun directly in the eyes. But a couple minutes after this shot, I wasn't alone. Another guy had the same idea. Gustav Axelson, who is still employed at Cornell University's Lab of Ornithology. He's a senior researcher, birder, writer, and also a part-time reporter for the New York Times. So this is my paragraph of fame story. Yeah, so Gustav joins me, and we're clicking away. We got the digital cameras. You can't mess that up. You gotta have good photos. And I'm pretty emotional, I got pretty excited. He thought I was hilarious. So, a month, with my permission, a month later, The article came out in the New York Times, and that's his photo, not mine, but we were very close. In a Minnesota Bog, a festival of birds, and he wrote about sort of my behavior, which is embarrassing, but anyway, I've got that great gray owl in like every room of every office I've been in. Every relative has that, but that I'm pretty proud of. Great gray owl. So that's just one more species towards this goal of 600. I show this map with the stars to indicate other areas that I was traveling really either for business or maybe family reasons to these other spots, but always the idea of seeing a new bird, of course, in my head. The one up here in North Dakota, interestingly, well, star up there. That's in Carrington, North Dakota. My middle name is Carrington, so I knew this must be Kismet. And they have an annual festival called the Prairies and Potholes Festival in June. So, the glaciers tore apart North Dakota and left a lot of what are now lakes, and the number of bird species is incredible. So I went to the festival and I picked up another 5 or 6 species. And again, these other stars indicate other places I went. Always keeping the 600. I'm a little OCD, 600's in my mind, I'm gonna get to this. So, have a daughter in Miami. You might remember this, Carly, but I took a little detour one afternoon. This bird is really hard to find. The mangrove cuckoo, super secretive, super quiet, but got him just south of Miami. American flamingo, Louisiana. That bird is very common in the Bahamas, but the Bahamas are not part of the ADA area. So that doesn't count. I just somehow found my way through work to Louisiana and picked up the American flamingo. Barnacle goose is a Eurasian, sort of Greenland, Iceland type bird, but was in Massachusetts. You know, the one in the front that looks different than this Canada geese, the white face. Ah, yeah. So, it's October 2011. Who has even heard of this movie, The Big Year, besides family and a couple of you? So the movie bombed, but look at this cast. We've got Jack Black, Steve Martin, Owen Wilson. It's really a fun movie, great music. It's about 3 guys trying to see as many birds as they can in 1 year, called The Big Year. Actually a true story based on a book that was written in 2004. But what's significant here, besides the fact that I went to the opening with my older son, and near the end of the movie, Jack Black says to Steve Martin, you know, my friend Jeff Shaw says the pink-footed goose is somewhere. And Steve Martin said, what? What is Jeff Shaw smoking? Well, Jeff Shaw is the name of my best friend since kindergarten, all the way through Haverford School. We went to college together, we played sports together in New York. Still buddies now. He comes up with his wife to Nineveh a lot. And when we heard his name, Jeff Shaw, like my son and I both jumped out of our seats, like, what is going on? And Carrie, my son, said, Dad, did the producers of the movie, do they know who you are? Like, are you part of this? Like, what's going on? I was like, no, this is crazy. And I did make a lot of calls and emails to try to figure out why they chose that name, Jeff Shaw. I never did figure it out. But a month later, our family met up with the Shaw family at a football game, and I'm at 599. It's November 2011, and the Shaws, of course, had seen the movie, and I made them see it, of course. So we're together, and they know where I am with my chase. That you're 599, George. You're 1 bird away. You can script it. You can basically choose any rare bird to make number 600. It's got to be special. I said, yeah, I know. I'm working, and I just haven't had a chance to focus on what that number 600 should be. And then Jeff's son, who was an undergrad at the school, he said, Woody, it's obvious. It's the pink-footed goose. And I was like, Max, yeah, okay, but, maybe 3 times a pink-footed goose have been seen in Canada or the United States. It's a Eurasian, again, Greenland, Iceland, European bird. But at halftime, I went ahead and Googled pink-footed goose North American. And lo and behold, there was one being seen in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I'm like, oh boy. And frequent flyer miles. A week later, the next Saturday, I made a couple phone calls, a couple of new best friends up in Canada, birders, and amazing what you can accomplish in a couple of days of the internet. They met me, Dave and John, met me at the airport, and 2 cars, walkie-talkies, and whisked me out to the soybean fields in Windsor County outside of Halifax. And that is what I first saw. I'm like, oh my God. Thousands of Canada geese. Fine water. Wait, is there a pink-footed goose here? Maybe. What are the odds of that? But within about 10 minutes, I'm with Dave. John radios us with a walkie-talkie and says, I've got the bird. It's with 7 or 8 other Canada geese, and it's flying towards your car. We were about a mile away at this point. I was like, I'll believe this when I see it. Well, I got the binoculars. We stayed in the car. I hadn't packed appropriately. It was about 10 degrees in November. Strangely cold. I didn't even have an overcoat, so we just stayed in the car. I got my binoculars on this group of birds coming, and I could see one of them was different. It wasn't a Canada goose. I tried to convince myself it was the pink-footed goose, but it was coming fast, and then I thought, oh my God, I gotta get a picture. So I had to fumble around, got the telephoto, big old lens, and just aimed at this group and click, click, click. And bingo. Wow. Now that you captured it with digital photography. So this guy, he's a little different than a Canada goose. The face pattern, the pink feet, colors are distorted by the sun. It looks like yellow feet to me, but you clearly know this is not a Canada goose, and it truly was a pink-footed goose. So you can give me an ovation, number 600. However, you just don't stop when you have this disease or affliction that I have. You don't just stop. And I knew that basically birdflation, inflation with birding, had occurred since I first made that challenge to myself in 1969. Basically, the advent of technology, the popularity of birding, better optics, the fact that Alaska has been made easily accessible to birders. I knew that I needed really to get to 700. 700 was the new 600. In order to satisfy my 11-year-old self, I gotta get to 700. So the march continues. Thankfully, these phones are absolutely amazing. My bird guide is on my phone. Cornell has several kinds of apps that are good for beginning birders and even advanced birders. And what's really cool is this eBird, which is like a dynamic population census. As long as birders around the world plug in their data and send it to Cornell, Cornell processes it all and spits it back out to you as frequently as every hour. And Cornell and the ABA have rated all birds on a scale of 1 to 6. The 1s are sort of the common sparrows and chickadees and cardinals, birds that you've all heard of. 6 is extinct. So I've swept the 1s and the 2s and pretty much the 3s. Personally, in order for me to increase my list, I need 4s and 5s. Those are one-time wonders, maybe once in 10 years, maybe once in 5 years sightings. But with this technology that Cornell and the ABA provide, at least I have a chance if I get a message and the bird is in Cape May, New Jersey, just 2 hours from my house, I have a chance of getting it. Prior to this, you had to rely on tape-recorded messages, which took a week, and by the time you listened to it, of course, the bird was gone. So this was a game changer for all birders around the world. It's a worldwide thing. So I just want to show some of my favorite shots as I'm trying to get to this goal of 700. This looks like a bob white, which we're familiar with in the east, sadly declining. Montezuma quail in Arizona. Super rare warbler, only found in central Texas. It's the only place you can find it in the United States. And tough one to photograph, golden sheep warbler. Well, this guy, there's a whole chapter in the book about this guy. He's super skittish. kind of the signature bird of Alaska, of at least passerines, of the songbirds. The blue throat. He's a good one. So number 661, ptarmigans. We have 3 species of ptarmigans in the United States. They're actually very easy to photograph. The willow ptarmigan, very cooperative. Oh yeah. So daughter Chloe at one point suggested, hey, George, why don't we have this sunroom with this brick wall, we can't put in nails and put up pictures. I have an idea to use this big blank space. Why don't you put up your bird list and use that as motivation, as if I needed any, but I loved her idea. So yeah, I had my 600, and I think 686 is when we sold the house. But the owners retained my artwork to this day, and we talk about it because we know who they are, so that's kind of fun. So it's 686. I show this picture of 2 of my best friends because I want you to know I'm more normal than you think. I don't just go bird alone. I don't just join tour groups with strangers, although I do. Nothing is more exciting and fun is to take family members or your friends on a little nature walk and just show them something they don't know. So all my friends have endured me at some point and taken bird walks. Funny enough, the guy on the right turned out to be a professional birder at a New Hampshire college tenured professor. I got him into birding in college, and then he went off and became a pro. It just calls me a very good amateur. Oh yes, King Ranch. So, owls, audience participation. Any idea how many different species of owls can be seen in the United States? Anybody, raise your hand if you have it. Yes, 73, that's the highest. I've done this twice before. That is a high number. It's not 73 owls. A little lower.
46.
19. So there are 19 species of owls in the country. I mean, up here, you're likely to maybe get 2 or 3. And I've seen 18 out of 19. The one bird that had escaped me is the ferruginous pygmy owl. And I missed him several times. He's a little 6-inch, diminutive, fierce. I'll keep my language clean because I had an expression, but I won't say it. He is a bad you-know-what. And the most reliable place that you can at least hear a ferruginous pygmy owl is on the King Ranch in Texas. So I did make I sort of made business in Houston. That was nice. And then the weekend, a lot of complications to get on a 6 a.m. van with 12 other birders like me, where we went into the territory. The guide said, "Oh, listen, you can hear the owls calling." Everybody but me was satisfied, because the point of this story is, ethically, you can count birds you hear, but I'm one of the old-fashioned purists. I want to see it, and I want to photograph it. I'm not just going to listen to this thing. Problem is, I wasn't alone. There were 11 other people, and they all went back in the van, and they want to leave. I'm not leaving. I'm standing outside, and this bird's a ventriloquist. We couldn't find it, and in 15 minutes it probably elapsed. The guide's getting a little frustrated with me. I'm like, dude, you don't know what trouble I got to get here and be on time. Just give me another 10 minutes. And right then, I looked up, and there it is. Didn't even need to telephoto. This bird was right above us, and the people in the van didn't even, they were happy they heard it. Sorry, I need that photo. I got my ferruginous pygmy owl, swept the owls, 19 out of 19. Moving on, that's 697, obviously getting close to 700. So, I thought, the best bang for the buck, I had business in Seattle, I'm doing a little Alaska trip. And I figured I'm going to break 700 in Alaska. And I actually arrived a day early for the tour that I'd signed up for on the Pribilof Islands. So I had an extra day, and I had an alert on my phone from Cornell and AVA that the Aleutian Tern, which is a code 2, it's really like a code 4, because you got to go to Alaska to even have a chance to see this bird. He was in the headquarters lake in the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge, south of Anchorage. And I had that extra day, so I went there, and there's a wildfire, a major wildfire raging, as you can see. It made national news. When I got to the refuge manager, Toby, I didn't have a scope, I'm traveling, I just had my binoculars. And he gets to the platform, and he says, there, look, across the lake, I look through the scope, there are 2 dots. He's like, those are your Aleutian terns. I'm like, okay, thank you. Dots, I couldn't identify that. And he said, I got business to do, I gotta go off back to the headquarters. Good luck. And so I'm standing on the platform for about 15 minutes, wishing that these 2 terns that are half a mile away are gonna do an amazing flyby so I can get a great picture. That's not gonna happen. And I remembered as he left, he said, and don't even think about going on the water. And I left, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not swimming. What is he talking about? There's no boats. What did he talk? I don't know what he's talking about. And I looked to my right, and down a ways on the shore, there's this big 12-foot fence jutting into the lake. So I guess I could have waded around the fence up to my chest to get to what looked like an overturned boat. But no, I decided to climb the fence, jump down, almost broke my leg, not to mention my telephoto lens binoculars, and got to this form on the beach, and it turned it over, and it was a rowboat. And it had 2 oars and a life preserver. And I thought, well, what the heck? He's not in sight. He did say that, be careful with the swells and the water, but most importantly, the airplanes that were coming and going were loading up on the lake to put out the fire, so it was very dangerous with planes coming. And, I'm sorry, I needed this bird. So, yeah, I'm not normally a risk taker, but in this case, I just was driven. And I said, if I don't survive this, at least I'll be viewed as legal because I have a life preserver. And I got to the back end of the lake in about 30 minutes. And there you go. Aleutian tern. You can clap. Number 7. Diagnostic pattern is the head pattern. They're common terns. There's a whole bunch of different terns, but there's no question when you look at the book and study the terns. All you have to do is see that white forehead, and you know you've got the Aleutian tern. So, for me, what was nice is that the trip didn't even start till the next day. Of course, I picked up a few more birds. And now I'm in the early 700s. So, what am I thinking about? What did I say about Hawaii? Hawaii did not count until 2016. And I imagine the Chamber of Commerce or somebody, the tourism folks of Hawaii, finally persuaded these thousands, tens of thousands of members of the ABA, like me. They voted Hawaii to now count. And Hawaii has a multitude of endemic birds that can only be seen in Hawaii. So for a lister like me, this was unbelievable news. And I happened to have that spring vacation in March of 2016, and I'll embarrass my lovely wife, Nina. You can just raise your hand now. Nina, sadly, didn't have the same vacation schedule as I did, so yeah, I left her at home. And we don't know why.
You can see that's a pattern here.
Yeah.
Well, you're still here. So.
It doesn't hurt that her brothers are birders. That's how I think I feel. So I spent 10 days, 3 islands, and I picked up 46 lifers. That's what we birders call new birds, lifers, 46 lifers. So a couple of these, the state bird is the nene, the Hawaiian goose. You have to be number 750. I showed this bird. This is interesting because the red crested cardinal is actually a native of Argentina. It's South American, but a lot of birds have been introduced to Hawaii, and after several generations, they establish a population, and the ABA, the big boys, decide that it's a species that can count. It's no longer a visitor or a vagrant. It's an established population. So a lot of these birds didn't start out in Hawaii, but are there in an established population. So red crested cardinal, you won't. Argentina and Hawaii, only places you can see it. This guy, the pueo, is the Hawaiian owl. Besides the fact that I love owls, I'm showing this because it's actually a subspecies of the American short-eared owl, and subspecies do not count towards the list. But heck, I mean, it's a great picture. It's in pouring rain. So he doesn't count as a number, but I could turn down get a nice picture of the Hawaiian owl. So moving on, I show red-legged thrush, 791, Key West, Florida. It helps to have a daughter in Miami. And this was an early COVID. You couldn't, prices were crazy to even think about spending the night. So thankfully, and you couldn't rent a car. So I visited my daughter in Miami, who was like, "Oh, hi, Dad. What bird are you chasing?" "Oh, I really want to see you, but there's a bird on Key West." And I had to make a couple of trips, but persistence, I guess, is the lesson learned here. In Miami, the Key West is not like next door.
No.
Did it a couple times, probably spent 12, 14 hours in the field until I finally got this guy. And he's only been seen twice in America. He's Cuban. And so when birders like me meet each other after a little bit of sort of getting to know and polite chat, eventually someone's going to say, "Well, have you seen the red-legged thrush?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I got that." No problem. So, again, 800's looming. Best place to get to. Gotta make a business trip to Seattle. That's close enough to Alaska. Let's go back. The prior trips to Alaska were in the spring. This trip was in the fall. Where's my list? Oh, here we go. I want you to see where I was. Gamble is on St. Lawrence Island. It's literally 20 miles from Russia. And the reason you go here in the fall is because you wish for the northwest winds to bring Russian and Japanese and sort of strange vagrants over to American soil. And I should have pointed this out earlier. For a bird to count, the bird needs to be on the American soil. So I've had instances at the Rio Grande. I see this guy over in Mexico who I need for my list, but it doesn't count for the ABA listing unless it's on American soil. That's a chapter in the book, though. Pretty funny story. So I'm in Gamble, and Gamble it's remote, but I felt it was the best place to go to rack up some more birds. And what's interesting is the Siberian Yupik folks, the Americans that live there, they live on the walrus, the seal, the whales, and they throw the carcasses and the bones into these areas where the vegetation grows, insects, and that means birds. And what's even more interesting is they found that digging deeper and creating these real pits, they not only find the old ivory, which is better for scrimshaw and carving and selling to bird tourists like me. They've made a whole business out of this, and it's fascinating stuff. It also creates these bunkers so that these birds have a place to hide. And I show this guy, I mean, I'll be honest, I never heard of a little bunting. It's some Russian bird. I call it an LBJ, little brown job. But my guide knew what it was, and I got the picture, and okay, I got it. I'm convincing myself. But you walk around these potholes and crevices and craters trying to find these little guys that are exhausted from their travels. So 799, another chapter in the book, funny story. I'll be honest, I never heard of this guy either. A Middendorf's Grasshopper Warbler. It's the page in the book that I never paid attention to. It's the most unusual, rarely seen Russian, Asian birds that once every few years pops over to Alaska and someone's lucky to see it. This guy is super shy. Never did a photo of this guy, but I was lucky along with the other folks on the trip. So that night, I still have 4 or 5 days left in the trip. I'm pretty confident I'm going to get to 800. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be unusual. At this point, I had a few bets in my head what it was going to be, but I did not expect it to be a Russian sparrow with a really cool name, the Siberian Accentor. So 800, come on. It's not that unusual in Russia, but rare. Code 4, pretty rare in America. Again, remote island of Alaska, the only chance you can see it. So yeah, I was was pretty pleased. I don't know if we have any basketball fans from the 1960s, particularly if you're a Philadelphian. People have gotten this reference. Does anybody have a guess as to why I decided to make my little 800 sign? Further back, 1960s. Who scored the most points in an NBA game ever?
Wilt Chamberlain.
Correct, Wilt Chamberlain, and there's a famous picture when he scored those 100 points in like 1962. He made a handwritten sign, 100. So, me humoring myself, you have to understand, it's like 9 days with a bunch of burgers, your mind starts to go. But that's what I was trying to imitate. And my guy, Aaron, super fellow. So we got to 800.
Wow.
Aha! This is one of my photographs. I was on a boat in Nunavut, which is Canada, close to Greenland. And the reason I showed this picture into the show is because I care about nature in general. Obviously, I love birds and consumed by birds, but really, overall, I care about nature. And this guy is sort of a signature, sadly, of environment in crisis and climate change and all the negative things. So I'll end with this picture of my granddaughter, Arlie, not even 2 years old. She's standing next to me. I got the binoculars, of course, and she picks up the dog bones, imitating me. And my closing remark is, if my granddaughter is ever to see a polar bear in the wild, we have to do a better job of stewarding